Hello, everybody, and welcome back to every episode of 1998 Powerpuff Girls reviewed season 4, plus the Powerpuff Girls movie itself. So, in this video, we'll go over each episode of season 4 and even the Powerpuff Girls movie. So, to warn you guys beforehand, I might have gone into season 5 episodes accidentally, so hopefully that's okay with you because I got the 10th anniversary Powerpuff Girls DVD here and it says about season 4, season 5 episodes or whatever. And I really want you guys to enjoy this video, so let's move on with every episode of this 1998 Powerpuff Girls reviewed season 4 and the Powerpuff Girls movie, so let's go. Flim Flam, episode 40. The air date is April 20th of 2001 and the production code is 401. The part of this episode is that a big name film director, Bernie Bernstein, comes to Townsville to steal money from the bank under the guise of directing a movie. Fun fact, this episode sets up the Powerpuff Girls movie. Sort of. And when I mean sort of, I actually do mean sort of. So in this episode, the girls are approached by Bernie Bernstein after a fight in Townsville. And Bernie Bernstein meets them at a fancy Asian eatery, I guess, and they sign a contract under the Professor Utonium's permission, of course. But then the girls get stuck up about the movie and become your stereotypical childhood stars. And the Professor Utonium gets suspicious after Bernie Bernstein yells at Bubbles and telling her to shut up. So the Professor Utonium goes down, tries to find a trailer, and discovers the plan about of he discovers the plan to the he discovers Bernie's real plan and tries to warn the girls, but he couldn't get to the girls or the police because the mayor gave him permits to film the Townsville Bank and its full use of its money. You see in that quote right there. I'm not gonna read all that. So what do I think about this episode? Is it a film that's destined to succeed or fail? Well, this is a Chemical X episode, which means it's great. This episode is great because it showed the bad side of Hollywood, in my opinion, but it doesn't show. It only shows the scammer sort of side of Hollywood, that like money laundering and stuff. And the director was actually a fucking criminal in the first place. So yeah, it's he's lucky that he didn't, return to Hollywood and everybody starts laughing at him once he returned to Hollywood, which I'm pretty sure he has the money to get a decent lawyer in Townsville. But anyway, even though this episode sort of sets up the Powerpuff Girls movie, I think it's a one off joke. And then they actually did it later in the season. Not later in the season, but you'll know what I mean once we get there. So yeah, this is why Flim Flam was a good episode for me. Get Back Jojo, episode 41. The air date is May 4th of 2001 and the production code is 402. The part of this episode is that Jojo goes back in time to prevent the Powerpuff Girls from ever existing. Fun fact, this is the second episode that involves time travel, right after Speed Demon. So in this episode, the professor, it's basically Father's Day, not Father's Day, it's career day at Pokey Oaks Kindergarten. The dads or the parents are explaining their careers in detail. But when it gets to Professor Utonium, he shows off the time machine. And then Jojo comes across this time machine by impersonating a student, basically. Yeah, weird and disturbing, but not really that disturbing when you think about it. And also, the time portal sequence is very crazy through the fifth dimension. So basically, it's like Back to the Future, but it's not Back to the Future, really. Yeah, it is not Back to the Future, but I'll get into that later down the line here. And Utonium's a brat in the past, which is no wonder because he wasn't interested in science as a little kid, but now he's interested in science because Powerpuff Girls went back in time to stop Mojo. That is literally it. But is this still a bad episode? No, it really isn't. This is a Chemical X episode, and the time travel episode is actually not that. It's perfect, but it's not perfect. It does have some flaws like the plot holes and stuff like that, but the plot holes are not really that bad, really. They're just retcons, in my opinion. So the professor got involved. Well, he wanted to make children because three little girls saved him that day. And I like the original backstory better. He just wanted to be alone. He just wanted to have kids so that he could continue on his legacy, I think. Not really to continue on his legacy just to be a parent, I believe. But Mo Jojo should have really watched Back to the Future because if something went wrong, like altering the time stream, like altering the time stream is a very bad idea anyway, because if you do something in the past, it'll surely affect the future. Because, let's see, in Back to the Future 2, George McFly died because of cancer, I believe. Not really cancer, but of a broken heart. So, Marty has to go back and fix that. And Doc Brown in part 3 hooks up with a lady and then has hypothetical children that breaks the time stream. So now the time stream is fucked up. So Mario Jojo should have really taken that into consideration. If he came back to the present and he destroyed Utonium, he wouldn't exist. The girls basically wouldn't exist. But he probably didn't think that far. So that's what happens in every time travel episode. So, yeah. This is a good episode, but the implications of Mojo Jojo forgetting that he wouldn't come into existence is very. It's not disturbing, it's laughable at best. Him Diddle Riddle, episode 42. The air date is April 14th of 2001, and the production code is 403. The plot of this episode is that him sets up a series of obscure challenges for the girls to complete under a certain time limit. If they fail to meet his bizarre orders, the professor will pay. Fun fact, him's phone form is creepy and cursed. And when I mean creepy and cursed, it is creepy and cursed. So him basically does all these challenges, sets up these challenges. So it's basically fight superheroes, fight a monster without superpowers, do an SAT, which I think is very stupid and pointless. And besides, riddles aren't him's forte anyway. He's more of a manipulative creature, don't you think? And also, this is proof that seasonal rot still exists in any show ever made. And yeah, him really needs a better plan. So I'm gonna explain why in the next slide after I say this. Is him's riddles good or do they really, really suck? Well, okay. I think that this episode is really poorly made. And when I mean poorly made, it is really poorly made, in my opinion. But that's because of the movie that came out during this time period, I believe. So basically, him does these stupid challenges for flapjacks, basically. And him says, I want to give the professor a free breakfast, so I'm making his daughters, do a stupid plan where he thinks he's in actual danger. But no, he's not in danger. He just doesn't want to pay for his breakfast. I mean, literally, you don't want to pay for your breakfast, dude? I'll pay for your breakfast if I have to. Because your plan is stupid. That is the stupidest plan I have ever heard of in my life. You didn't see Plankton offering him free breakfast, or Fawn from the Flash series offering to play chess with him. You just don't see that happening. Offering to play chess with Barry Allen, the Flash, of course, but those are more serious shows. And when I mean serious shows, I only mean the Flash show. So yeah, you're flapjacks. So basically, him did this all for flapjacks. He even kidnapped Mrs. Keane to get a profit. I would see Mr. Krabs doing this if he could. I see him doing a lot worse. A lot worse than this. So, yes, it's a mediocre episode, but is it really all that bad? Is it an Adult X episode? No, it's not an Adult X episode. I think the flapjack thing was pretty stupid, and I think the professor, I don't, the girls really thought that the professor's life was in danger. That's ridiculous. I can think of a better plan. How about have riddles across the city that actually do something? And you basically held a woman hostage for fucking breakfast food. Okay, I'm not that desperate. Okay, nobody's that desperate. I don't blame the girls in this instance because they saved Professor from. They didn't save the Professor from danger. They almost saved him from his breakfast, I guess. So, thankfully, there's an episode later down the line that'll be one more redeemable than this. Members Only, Episode 43. The air date is May 25th of 2001, and the production code is 404. The part of this episode is that the Powerpuff Girls go to Mount Everest in order to audition to join the Association of World Supermen, an exclusive all-male organization of international superheroes. But is there less to this association than it appears? The fun fact here is that Major Glory has the same voice actor as the King of Eugopatamia from Very Odd Parent itself. So basically, that's why I picked that fun fact. And Major Glory is from Dexter's Lab, you know, those shorts where the superheroes are in an apartment and stuff like that. The girls idolize this organization because, oh, they're grown up superheroes, maybe they'll let us join. But it turns out that they're fucking dicks and assholes too. They passed all the examinations, but the superheroes are just real fucking assholes. And I don't blame them. God, I just do not like these people. Not in real life, they're fictional. They're fictional characters. So let's just move on with our lives. Professor Utonium gives a speech about how you don't need to be in a super organization. But then the main villain comes, who's jacked up on steroids, I guess, because he has nothing else better to do. And then there's sexual innuendos in this episode because it's called Members Only, because you get the gist. So, what do I think of this episode? This is a mediocre episode for me. Even though it has a great ending and everything, it doesn't excuse Major Glory and the other superheroes from being dicks. And you know why? You're supposed to be superheroes. You're supposed to be good people, not fucking bad people. At least Batman was at least a little more honorable with his stick. Superman is good. Major Glory? Nope. He's an asshole. But he's the more PG version of him. He's the PG version of Homelander. Thank God for that. So yeah, besides the ending, this is a mediocre episode for me. But maybe the next episode will be greater. Knock It Off, episode 44. The air date is July 13th of 2001 and the production code is 405. The plot of this episode is that the professor's old college roommate, Dick Hartley, stops by for a visit. When he gets his first glance at the girls, he comes up with an idea to create his own and sell them off as a security system to make money. Fun fact, the name Dick Hartley is a sexual innuendo. I hope I got that right. So in this episode, Professor Dick Hartley is basically being a huge dick, as you all know, because he's an asshole in this episode. The Professor Utonium is naive in this episode, but it's understandable, and he starts to catch on pretty quickly. Not pretty quickly, but like he starts seeing the Powerpuff Girls being in other cities, and then he starts getting suspicious, like, what the hell is going on? Did they steal Chemical X behind my back or something? So he probably found out when the camera wasn't showing, said, shit, I gotta get that Chemical X back from Dick. And once his Dick Hartley gets that power trip, that is where he starts falling. Like falling so deep, it's ridiculous. And also, I came up with a miraculous joke for the quote that you see, but I may say it in another episode or something because I think the joke might be too inappropriate. So yeah, this is a very so what do I think about this episode? I think this is a pretty good episode. I really, really love this episode because, well, Dick Hartley gets what he deserves in the end, and that's being killed by the creations he had made. So yeah, this is a pretty good episode, even though the professor Utonium was a little naive and doesn't understand what's going on. I think that Dick Hartley did deserve his demise because the only ingredient that he forgot was love. And yeah, that is pretty much it. So let's move on to the next episode. Superfriends, episode 45. The air date is May 18th of 2002 and the production code is 406. The part of this episode is that the girls meet a new neighbor named Robin Snyder, but their friendship is strained by the girls' crime fighting, leaving Robin in Princess's agenda. Fun fact, this episode is Robin Snyder's debut to the Powerpuff Girls universe. So basically, in this episode, the Powerpuff Girls meet a new neighbor named Robin Snyder, and they start becoming bestest of friends. But the Powerpuff Girls superheroics start getting in the way, but before that, they do an accident joke, and the Powerpuff Girls and Robin make great friends, and there are references to other episodes that they talk about. But then when we get into the princess part of the episode, The rift between the Robin and the Powerpuff Girls starts to open wider than the Great Canyon, so you know it's bad. And Princess Morbucks is a brat as usual, but in this episode, I am glad that she's just ignored as the Powerpuff Girls go away. So, what do I think about this episode? This is a Chemical X episode because the Powerpuff Girls get a normal friend for once. Not for once, they're already friends with everybody in kindergarten, so it's going to be a very tough time to have a friend that doesn't know that you have superpowers. So this episode is pretty good, and Princess does get what she deserves in the end. Sure, they ignore her. They basically ignore her as they walk away. And Princess, she's not going to have friends in her future. She's going to have fake friends. While the Powerpuff Girls have real friends, a real family that rely on each other. So, yeah, this is a very, very great episode and actually subverts expectations of the usual stereotype of super friends, like everybody has superpowers that they come across. So yeah, this is a pretty good episode and I would recommend it. All Chalked Up, episode 46. The air date is April 27th of 2001 and the production code is 407. The plot of this episode is that after Buttercup becomes so selfish by destroying Bubbles' chalk, Bubbles befriends a butterfly, him in disguise, that asks her to express her anger, but her monster drawings come to life and bring destruction at Pieguyrulz. Fun fact, there's a lesson about anger in this episode. So basically, the episode is about Buttercup and Bubbles arguing, and then Bubbles has a meltdown, goes into the forest, and is given new chalk after Buttercup destroys the old one. And if I do say so myself, I think him's disguise is laughable at best. And the chalk monsters are designed okay because, well, those monsters were designed by a child after all, a mere child, so with superpowers. So, I don't think Bubbles is that stupid to accept chalk from literally himself. But then again, the writers are gonna just do things that are completely out of character. That's what happens when you go on for more than 4 seasons, I guess, or even 3 seasons. So what do I think about this episode? All Chalked Up is a very mediocre episode to me because of him's disguise and Bubbles being too gullible in this episode. There is a lesson about anger in this episode, I guess, but she did use her anger positively to save the day, so what is done by Bubbles has been undone by Bubbles, basically. And him gets humiliated at the end by being drawn wings made of chalk, basically. Yeah, and it does have a pretty unique ending with the ending hearts and stuff like that. So, and the chalk monsters drawing themselves back to life, I guess, is a pretty unique concept that I like. That I would see in Chalk Zone probably, not in Powerpuff Girls. So, yeah, this is a very mediocre episode for me, but at the same time, this would have been much better in Chalk Zone. Neo of the North, episode 47. The air date is June 1st of 2001 and the production code is 408. The plot of this episode is that an acidic rain cloud blankets Townsville and melts all the buildings, cars, and clothing items in range. Fun fact, the Neobots are actually ruthless in destroying the city. So the plot of this episode is the Neobots are basically ruthless and destroying basically everything. And the Powerpuff Girls can't defeat them because they're nanobots. So the professor has to shrink them down to size after the Powerpuff Girls get nude. Not nude, like their clothes get stripped away from them, from the nanobots. And then there's a Dragon Ball Z boss fight, not boss fight. It's a Dragon Ball Z anime fight where the nanobots are getting defeated by the Powerpuff Girls, but the nanobots get transform into a nanobot Power Ranger style, basically. Not Power Ranger style, but anime style. But Professor Utonium is protecting the girls from getting stomped on by the citizens. And Professor Utonium defeats the nanobot by, well, stepping on it like a bug. And the ending art is pretty different from the usual ones. From the usual ones of the episode. So what do I think about this very unique episode? I think this episode is actually pretty good because Professor Utonium defends his children from the Manobot, the 6-inch Manobot. And that's what a father should do. Anyway, protect his kids. And even though the Powerpuff Girls did most of the fighting, and the townspeople were evacuating the town, we still don't know where the nanobots came from. If they came from Jojo or were aliens or anything like that. All we know is pretty much they just came out of nowhere. So yeah, is this a pretty good episode? Yes, it is a pretty good episode. It is pretty unique for the time. So yeah, why this is a great episode. Stray Bullet, episode 48. The air date is June 8th of 2001 and the production code is 409. The plot of this episode is that Bubbles saves an injured squirrel by giving it Chemical X, turning it into Bullet, the Powerpuff Squirrel. With its newfound superpowers, the squirrel joins the girls and helps them fight crime. Fun fact, this is Bullet's first appearance. So basically for this episode, Bubbles heals a squirrel by giving it Chemical X, and she gets worried that it won't make it through the night. But by the time they go back to check on it in the morning, it's healing fine, but they have to go stop Mojo doing his latest scheme. And the Powerpuff Girls go to Mojo's house, not Mojo's house, Mojo's lair. It gets stuck in flypaper while Mojo sets up every explosive known to man. And Bubbles does a noble thing by, you know, helping Bullet, which is a she, by the way. And there is an action scene with Bullet at the end with the Hawk. Basically, the Hawk injured Bullet in the beginning. Now she can take it on. So, what do I think of this episode? Stray Bullet is a great episode because of Bubbles' quick thinking saved Bullet, who became a Powerpuff Squirrel, and ultimately helped Bullet become a hero of the forest. But Bullet did get a little homesick and wanting to be in the forest for forever, and the girls did say their goodbyes, even though Bullet will return in the city of Nutsville, a season 5 or season 6 episode, I believe. This can also help with people who are struggling to let things go. So I recommend this episode, and this episode is fantastic. Forced Kin, episode 49. The air date is June 22nd of 2001, and the production code is 410. The part of this episode is when an alien force proves its intelligence for their fighting strategies. The Powerpuff Girls turn to Mojo. The Powerpuff Girls turn to Mojo for help. Fun fact, Buttercup has the potential to become evil or an anti-hero. So the part of this episode is basically an alien copying their moves, the Powerpuff Girls moves, and Mojo's plans as well as seen later in the episode. So Mojo and the Powerpuff Girls join forces after an alien starts destroying Townsville, basically. So Mojo trains the Powerpuff Girls to become evil. And then there's a global warming plan that Mojo was gonna do, but the aliens stole it. Mojo's plans are genius, but when they do not work, Mojo snaps and defeats the alien robot at the end. And it is a very, very satisfying to see. So, what do I think of this episode? And yes, this is the Chemical X episode from this. I'm going to tell you the reason why I like this episode so much. And it's because of Mojo's breakdown at the end. It is so satisfying to see him, you know, break down like that. And he even defeated the alien robot with a broken with a expired loaf of bread. That's how powerful that loaf of bread was. And it short circuited him. So the aliens just retreated like a bitch off the planet. So we don't have to deal with them anymore. Thank you, Mojo. Even though villain support might come and tell you to stop and tell you that you're not a villain anymore, but we'll see where that leads us to. But hey, at least Mojo saved his world. But that's what typical villains and heroes do sometimes. They team up against a bigger villain. So yeah, that's the reason I like this episode so much. Keane on Keane, episode 58. The air date is December 6th of 2002, and the production code is 501. Part of this episode is that Professor Utonium and Mrs. Keane go out on a date set up by the girls, though Miss Keane and the professor get distracted from using the hotline so much that the mayor can't reach the girls. Fun fact, Professor Utonium recounts the episode Can't Catman Do from season 1. So this episode is basically a Valentine's Day episode, and the girls set up Professor Utonium with Miss Keane on a date at a pizza parlor, and so basically the girls write fake letters to the professor and Miss Keane, and they figure out pretty quickly why that is. So the professor tells them, "Hey, Miss Keane and I aren't just into each other," but then Miss Keane slips on something, and the professor grabs her, I guess, and then they fall in love. And the phone starts getting uphogged by Miss Keane and Professor Utonium, and the Powerpuff Girls keep up the responsibilities of the household that they live in. But at the end of the episode, they kind of break up after the Valentino thing. Basically, Valentino is Mrs. Keane's cat. So, and then the Professor Utonium's phobia of cats actually returns in this episode because it does. I wouldn't blame him. So, what do I think of the episode? Well, so this is a pretty mediocre episode for me because of, well, basically the premise, which any other kids show will do at one point or another. Valentine's Day, Valentine's Day, Valentine's Day. They just put it everywhere these days. And well, even though Miss Keane and Professor Utonium are would be a great couple in my opinion, there's one problem with that. Miss Keane is the Powerpuff Girls kindergarten teacher, and he's the parent of the Powerpuff Girls, so it wouldn't work out in the end. Even though it might work out if they were out of school, but in school it wouldn't work because of the implications. So yeah, even though Professor Utonium didn't yell at Miss Keane, they had to break up by the end of the episode because they weren't going to have this love arc come like this arc over a few more episodes because the Powerpuff Girls show is mostly episodic with no continuity whatsoever, but it does have some continuity, I do believe, even in the later seasons. For example, Dynamo or Utonium's phobia of cats, which isn't a phobia, it's a justified phobia. So yeah, I think this is a good episode. Not So Awesome Blossom, episode 50B. The air date is December 6th of 2002, and the production code is 501. So the plot of this episode is that even superheroes have bad days. Blossom, for unknown reasons, loses her confidence and intelligence and becomes a Jinx. Fun fact, Mojo Jojo makes a robot army similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom Plankton robot army, which it came out a year after this. So Battle for Bikini Bottom technically ripped off this episode, but for a little bit, I guess. Blossom gets out of character for a bit, which I don't like, but it is understandable because they're having a bad day. And Mojo takes advantage of Blossom's weakness once Mojo notices it, and Blossom runs away like a coward. If you have a bad day like that, nobody has a bad day like that enough. Usually they stop being superheroes and start being normal kids. That's what they do. But no, Blossom says no. I'm gonna run away from a loving family. So, and she gets a job, which I'm pretty sure she lied in her application that she was more than. Anyway, let's not get into the implications of that. So, what do I think about this episode? Well, okay, hear me out. Because this is an Adult X episode. Even though it's not particularly bad, it's still fucking awful. This episode is just awful. Blossom just runs away for no reason besides having her becoming a Jinx. That's not a reason to run away. It's not a good reason to run away. Even this episode just does not make sense. Blossom gets a job? No. That's not how it works. It's just a weird episode. It's like they just slapped this together or something to fill up the fourth season or something. I just do not understand why this episode's so fucking bad. I just don't know why. The episode is. I'll explain why it's bad. And also Mojo weeps. The invention that Mojo has is very skillful, I guess, but Blossom is not the one that usually loses her confidence. Well, except for that hair episode, like the main event, but I think that was a Mediocre and an Antidote X episode, I believe, but I'll have to check back on my notes here after this. So yeah, I just do not like this episode at all. This episode is just one of the worst episodes of the season, or the only bad episode of the season that is truly fucking awful. So yeah, I did not like this episode a lot. Powernoia, episode 51. The air date is December 6th, 2002, and the production code is 502. The plot of this episode is that him uses the girls' worst fears to his advantage in the land of dreams, but it is up to the girls to confront their fears and defeat the demon known as him. Fun fact, him can cause nightmares just like the Powerpuff Girls in Dream Scheme. So basically, it's Dream Scheme, but with the roles reversed. The villain is the one causing the problems, and the girls are just the victims of the villain. So paranoia is a central theme in this episode as well, as because Blossom has fears of not studying, Buttercup has a fear of spiders, which is understandable, and Bubbles has a fear of the dark, which is understandable. And him could cause nightmares, like I said before. This episode is actually a pretty good episode, even though it's a half-hour episode. It's very interesting with the power of dreams, which has been done once before. So him doing this plan makes sense. So the girls waking up with no sleep is a good plan. So, and it is a pretty good episode. So what do I think about this episode? So I think Powernoia is a Chemical X episode because of the unique concept of fear and dreams, like in Dream Scheme, for example. The concept is turned on its head once again, but instead of girls defeating the Sandman, it's him messing with the girls instead. It's a good episode still. It's a unique premise. So the girls go through their fears throughout the episode, and him somehow gets into their house, which is not surprising because he's a literal demon, for God's sake. And then Blossom has her own fears. It's basically a nightmare situation. Basically, nightmare situation. So and then at one point they all start looking like him, which makes sense because him is the one responsible for this madness. But then the girls get over their fears and defeat him and throw him down a chasm, which I'm not surprised that he did not die in that episode. Because if he died in that episode, we wouldn't have the return of the Rowdy Rough Boys in the 5th season. Because him would be dead. Or another demon would have taken over his place. So yeah, this is a Chemical X episode. But him reviving the Rowdy Rough Boy, I'll get to that point in season 5. Nuthin Special, episode 52A. The air date is March 25th of 2005, and the production code is 503. The plot of this episode is that Buttercup feels like she's nothing special when she realizes she's the only Powerpuff Girl lacking a unique ability. Fun fact, at the end of the episode, Buttercup can curl her tongue, but this is part of proof that seasonal rot really exists. And I'll get into that later. So, in this episode, Buttercup wants to find out what her special power is, so they do everything from super strength, lasers, everything, I guess. But Bubbles does have the power of language and Blossom has the power of ice, and there's also a reference to the Matrix and a Kiss reference, specifically the main singer, Gene Simmons, I believe his name is. And there's also a Spanish-speaking giant squirrel at the beginning of the episode. And Buttercup can curl her tongue. Now, I'll get into that why that is part of seasonal rot. They could have thought of a very better power like telekinesis or go take a page out of Magneto's book and just attract magnets, I guess. But I guess that would have been a problem too. But hey, curling her tongue is not a good idea anyway. Is that I think that's partly the taunt your enemies. It's not a real power. So I'll explain why when I tell you when I think of this episode. Okay, this is a very, very, very mediocre episode to me because it's not that good of an episode to begin with. It's just more of a filler episode than anything. You'd think this would be an Antidote X episode, but it's not really an Antidote X episode. I would rather have a filler episode than a bad episode because at least you're not getting insulted throughout it. So the power situation, curling her tongue, that's proof that the seasonal rot actually exists. Or it could have been they did it in a rush because of the Powerpuff Girls movie. Who knows? In my honest opinion, who knows? It could have been that, for all I know. Anyway, this is a filler episode. It contributes nothing to the situation, not situation, to the show itself. It's just there to fill up a slot in a season. That's all it is. It's there to fill a slot up on a season. It's not an Antidote X episode, though. It's a mediocre episode at best. It shouldn't have been made to begin with, but it's just not that good to me. It's not that good. It's not an Antidote X episode, but it's mediocre. It's just a mediocre episode that shouldn't have been made, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. So let's move on to the Powerpuff. Okay, we came to the last episode of season 4, and it's called Neighborhood, episode 52B. The air date is March 25th, 2005, and the production code is 503. The plot of this episode is that Bubbles' favorite show loses all of their joy after they convince viewers to send in their money for unknown reasons. So Bubbles steals money from the city's treasury to bring its joy back. Fun fact, Whimsical Lily might be across from Mr. Rogers in the Magic Roundabout. Yeah, you know why I came to that point? Because Whimsical Lily does look like Mr. Rogers in the Magical Roundabout a little bit, to me personally. I haven't seen Magic Roundabout at all because I was in the States, United States for crying out loud. But anyway, basically the plot of this episode is that Whimsical Willie convinces kids to send in their money because the show is basically a scam and she doesn't even know it. Also, Bubbles' smile is really weird, which to a point I can understand. The animators had no time, probably. But the mayor watching the show is fucking hilarious. And Buttercup and Blossom are the straight people of the episode. Like, when I mean the straight people of the episode, I don't mean their sexuality. I mean the common sense people. So I'll just call them the common sense people from now on. So Buttercup and Blossom are the common sense people of this episode because, well, some things don't seem as normal as Bubbles thinks. So they eventually reveal to Bubbles that the show that she's watching is a scam. So they explain to her, and Bubbles redeems herself at the end of the episode. So what do I think about this episode? Well, this is a pretty mediocre episode for me because Bubbles is usually not this stupid. When I mean not usually the stupid, she's not usually the stupid. Yes, she's gullible at points, but she isn't so gullible it's ridiculous. My God. You think that Bubbles after a while would catch on to this stuff, but yeah. Sometimes you gotta make it easier for the kids to watch, and continuity is not exactly a critical point for the Powerpuff Girls, and it never probably will be. But anyway, it's a mediocre episode for me because of this point. Should have been done better? Yes, it should have been done better. But there's nothing I could do about it because, well, it's years later. They can't just go back to the series and just change it back. It's not gonna happen. It's not really gonna happen. So Buttercup and Blossom, Buttercup and Blossom, rather, they tell Bubbles, as I said before, that it's all fake, and then Bubbles fights back. And then when School Willie ends up in jail at the end of the episode, yeah, he does. It gets beaten up by prisoners because he targeted children, and not in the way you think. So yeah, this is a mediocre episode, even though the villain is kind of hilarious. Even though the initials of the villain are WW, it's Willy Wonka. I think it's supposed to be more of a Willy Wonka parody than a Mr. Rogers parody, but I could be dead wrong. Very dead wrong. So that's why I think it's a mediocre episode, even though Bubbles should know better at this point. The Powerpuff Girls movie. The air date is July 3rd, 2002, and the production code is NA. So the plot of this movie is basically the origin story of the Powerpuff Girls, except a mysterious chimpanzee uses the arrest of Professor Utonium to convince the girls to turn against Townsville unwillingly. Fun fact, Craig McCracken regrets making the movie with dark themes. Or so I've heard in this movie, because he has really regretted it, but not. He should have had some more lighter moments, yes, but it's not his fault. So the highlights of this movie are Fuzzy Lumpkins is more violent at the beginning of the movie. The professor becomes shocked and confused at the Powerpuff Girls' birth. And highlight 3 is the Powerpuff Girls are less restrained because the movie is basically the origin story of the Powerpuff Girls themselves. So yeah, so Jojo, who is just known as Jojo in this movie until the climactic final battle, manipulates the girls and uses them to create simian infused with chemical X, basically. Or basically mutants, basically. Chemical X seems to be way more important in this movie than in the series overall because it's very powerful. And it can even change people like it did to Dick Hardley, but the less we talk about Dick Hardley, the better. And there's a great final battle at the end between the girls and Mojo, which I really do like. And when Mojo is finally defeated, it is very, very, very satisfying. So what do I think about this movie? So this is a Chemical X movie because not only of the visual effects, it has a great story, which is the origin story of the Powerpuff Girls. Even though in the original series, the origin story of Mojo is pretty much very, very different from the original movie. But it does explain how the girls know Jojo in a way. And also, it doesn't display special powers within the movie because this is before they got their special powers. And well, it's just a very great movie. And Jojo tries to do a Planet of the Apes style, but it turns into more like a Planet of the Ape overlords. Because Jojo, he might be evil, but then he turns himself into an Omega evil ape overlord at the end, which I do like, but it makes sense. All that chemical X will probably catch up to him in the future, which explains a lot. And the monkeys that got turned into Mojojo like beings probably stayed like that for a good while until they found a cure for them. So yeah, that's all I have to say about the movie, so let's move on. My personal most meh and best Season 4 Powerpuff Girls episode. You might be wondering why I don't have a worst category, because the worst, there's only one episode on here. One episode. You think I would have more, but no, I don't. So the best Powerpuff Girls episodes from season 4 are Get Back Jojo, which is number 3. Number 2 is Powernoia. And number 1 is Force Kin. Yeah, I like these episodes the best. So let's move on to the mad category. We have members only, which is okay, I guess. Him Diddle Riddle is more infuriating than good. And 1 is Nuthin Special. It's just a waste of everybody's time, and it was just pointless to the plot, to the main continuity of Powerpuff Girls to begin with. Even though they gave her an ability, that's not a superpower. Okay, that's just not a superpower. Okay, so let's move on. As you can see in the season 4 pie chart here, we have Chemical X episodes / the movie, which I put together, which are 9, Mediocre episodes, which are 6, and the Antidote X episodes, which are 1. So it means the Antidote X episodes went down because they weren't as bad as seasons 3, 2, or 1 Antidote X episodes, which I'll explain in the next slide. It seems like we're going up in quality a bit than I previously thought. So we might have a season 5 where it's good throughout. Or who knows? It might go down again. So let's move on to the next slide. If you see all these 4 of these pie charts, you can see that there's like a back and forth type of quality. Like it's growing and growing, and then it goes back down, which means Antidote X episodes, they might not come back in seasons 5 to 6, but I doubt it. Which means we might have more, which means we could have our first Antidote X season, or first of 2 Antidote X seasons, or a mediocre season. But the mediocre episodes seem to be getting bigger and larger. And they're getting bigger and larger, but they go down. 2. In some places of the pie chart, it goes down and some goes up, like the Chemical X episode, for example. Maybe in season 5 we'll see our first Antidote X season, as I said beforehand. So seasonal rot still does exist in these episodes, in any kind of episode, even though you can't deny it. So let's move on to our last slide. In my opinion, season 4 is a Chemical X season, but barely a good season. Because even though it has 9, I have a very bad feeling that this will be the last Chemical X season of the series, of the original series, and then we'll get an Antidote X season and a mediocre season after this. But I could be wrong. I was wrong beforehand in season 3. In the last video I did about this. So yeah, it's a Chemical X season, and it's a pretty good season. The movie was pretty good too, and I liked it. So that's a Chemical X season, and that's every episode of 1998 Powerpuff Girls reviewed season 4. So I'll see you in the next few videos where we will talk about an update and my first Sonic creepypasta.